could you please tell me what led to the creation of MsMojo in 2016, especially given the success of WatchMojo's main channel and in light of WatchMojo's demographics? Because I think, was it 86, 87% that were male viewers at the time?
Exactly. So I like to say that some ideas aren't necessarily ideal or good when they're like at a given point in time, but then later on they may be great ideas. So when we had like 1 million subscribers on WatchMojo and 80% were men, there really wasn't a critical mass in the female viewership to merit launching a standalone channel. So as we got closer to 10 million subscribers and 10 years of operations, then it made sense for us to launch MsMojo and like incubate it as a startup within a startup. And so we launched MsMojo, but so one was the timing. Two, the reality is the people. You know, you can always talk about a product, but if you don't have the right people, it's really hard to execute. So with MsMojo, you know, obviously the name connotes like Elle or Mademoiselle, you know, magazine brands, that it's like geared towards a female demo. But even then it wasn't that obvious, and I'll get to it in point 3. But point 2 being like people like some of my colleagues were like, look, you know, we would like to have a new channel called MsMojo, where, to segue to point 3, we can cover some topics that, given the way YouTube works, where it's a very vertical focus, very niche, it's very limited in a lane. Like if I subscribe to a vegan guy who makes burritos, that's all I want to see. You know, if he makes a vegan pie, it's like a bit different. Or if he makes a meat burrito, it's very different. You know, YouTube is very fickle like that. So for us, admittedly, it wasn't that we said like Sex in the City is for women or men. It's not like we said like men can't listen to One Direction or women can't listen to Megadeth. That was not at all the case. I have 2 daughters. If they grow up to like, you know, gaming or heavy metal, it's fine. It's 2020. I totally get it. Traditional gender roles have changed. So I was very hesitant. But when like some of my female colleagues brought it up, and we knew that, well, look, it's not just 80-20. There's also generally a rule of thumb that about 10% of a mainstream WatchMojo publications audience is LGBTQ. We knew that we were actually underserving the female demo and the LGBTQ community. And we knew that there would be a percentage of men who would carry over to MsMojo. But because we didn't want to insult their intelligence and kind of call it more mojo, but effectively it was like our version of Mademoiselle or Elle, clearly geared towards a traditional female demo, we just said, look, let's own it. Let's call it MsMojo. Let's explain it why. We're going to get some criticism on day one because this is the internet. And we did. Some people were like, oh, you know, it's 2020 or gendering and it's very sexist. But then that washed away. People moved to the latest scandal, and it wasn't even a scandal. And then the community that grew out of that is super positive, and it accomplished the mission, which was to create a kind of healthy environment and safe channel where fans of One Direction and fans of Sex in the City could watch videos without like the traditional male heavy, you know, explosions and gaming and all that. Wanted a certain type of topic. So for us, it was just like an alignment of many things, and a key ingredient to being successful as an entrepreneur is timing.
That's good. That's a good answer. Really good. Well, then I'm interested in your view on the phenomenon whereby companies shift, in this case, right, from selling, let's say, a small number of hit items, in this case, WatchMojo's main channel, and so selling in large volumes, versus selling a larger number of niche items. So would you say that the creation of the new channel is an example of this, of like the long tail?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. Historically, you know, in media, if you wanted to reach, the adage goes, if you wanted to reach 80% of Americans, you would call ABC, CBS, NBC, and eventually Fox as well, and you would be able to place one ad and reach 80% of Americans. So what happened to network TV with the advent of cable is there was an era of fragmentation. And then what the internet did, it was kind of like the 500 cables on cable exponentially grew, where it's very fragmented. And historically, again, now in the early days of the internet, you did have these portals emerge, you know, and search engines emerge, where it was like a funnel. very few websites commanded all the attention. But over time, with the maturity of the internet, obviously there's going to be more niche communities. There's going to be more fragmentation. Things are going to splinter out, and you'll be able to go really deep and super serve an audience. And that's what's happened. And YouTube was always like that. But yeah, for us, we did not believe that we could be everything to everyone. Even if you think about it, we started off very horizontal. We had automotive content, comedy content, business content, music, entertainment, fashion. We narrowed it down to entertainment. Even distribution, we were a bit all over the place, and we realized we should narrow it down to YouTube. But there's always a regression to the mean, right? People go very niche, and then they kind of expand again. The key is to do it at the right time, to apply the right amount of resources, and know when it's like, okay, we've kind of overshot, we now need to go and kind of back to the mean. But yeah, so what you are seeing with WatchMojo was we were very horizontal, we were casting a wide net, we narrowed it down, and then we said, hey, let's start expanding. So MsMojo was us expanding through the lever of a demographic, female. WatchMojo Espanol was us expanding in the lens of a region, language. Snap, which is a popular platform, was us expanding through the lever of a platform. So the idea is you find this platform format fit. Investors talk a lot about product market fit, where Yelp is a product that made sense for the market of listings and food and restaurants and all that. So WatchMojo, I said we didn't invent top tens, Wayne's World, Letterman, Moses and the 10 Commandments. It's been widely known. We kind of nailed the timing of the format and the style of top tens for YouTube. So what you're seeing with our kind of channel and brand portfolio evolution is just that kind of going to niche, mass, niche, mass. And that's just the way it always goes, right? Like even consumer product companies, at some point they're like, we're just about Coca-Cola. We only sell Coca-Cola. Then they go through phases where like, oh, we should have iced tea. We should have water. We should have energy drinks. Then they're like, oh, we lost focus. Let's go back to just Coca-Cola. So companies historically have always done that. It's just a matter of where you are in your life cycle.
The timing part you're mentioning is quite interesting because we don't make as much reference to that in class, but I guess it is something that is a
timing. Yeah, you don't get any credit or extra marks for being prematurely right. The best cases are when you are one step or two steps out of a market and you could adjust your spending, frankly, your burn rate or just the velocity. The worst thing you could do is be super late, but also to be 10 steps ahead. When you're 10 steps out of the market, you generally fail because the technology is not, consumers have not adopted it. Google was the 13th search engine. So that there's also, you don't want to be first, right? Actually, you never want to be first. WatchMojo, for all our relative success, and success is fluid, subjective, and relative. It changes over the course of, one's life, how you view success. But absolutely, we were in the third wave of content producers in video. We were there was a first wave, which was in the late 90s. The second wave was coming out of the dot-com bubble bursting and the NASDAQ crashing after 9/11. We, in the third wave, were basically lucky in that we didn't just nail the timing, but we also got the timing right vis-a-vis distribution. Right. It wasn't just that content production was good timing. It was that, hey, YouTube was on the block, and YouTube was this huge platform that ended up taking over all of media.
I have a question about that coming up, but I guess something that popped into my mind too was you mentioned for MsMojo that it seems like it's not only women per se, but also the LGBTQ community. Can you describe or expand on the customer segment? Who can you picture watching MsMojo, as in, demographic, maybe age, or is it broad? Is it hard?
Yeah, so great question. So I've always viewed, I call content, they say content is king, and I go distribution is queen, and who has the power there. But then context is the prince. What does that mean? A given video copied and embedded on another website takes a very different meaning. An extreme example I was using was, let's take a neo-Nazi rally. Horrible example, but a neo-Nazi rally on a right-wing racist website is propaganda. It incites hate, violence. But a neo-Nazi rally on an informational news or educational website may actually prevent the spread of hate. If you think about it. So the context is really important. That's an extreme example. So I always viewed from day one that if we produced a video and this was around the time when YouTube pioneered embedding a video. This was novel. Like before, you couldn't just take a YouTube video and embed it on any website. So I always felt that videos were standalone engagements. It was a standalone experience, right? If you watch a video, it's in your context, in your perspective, given where you are in your life. So I actually never, and I'm being very candid, I never viewed MsMojo as it's for women. I viewed it more as like it's for a given basket of topics that historically share an audience, or there's a bunch of Venn diagrams and they overlap more. It's likely, like there's a high it's positively correlated that if you like Sex in the City, you may like New Girl.
Yeah.
There's nothing wildly controversial about that. So I am a straight, cis male, I'm married. I like Sex in the City. I like New Girl. Okay. Nobody's commenting, and that's why I challenged the people on day one. We're like, this is sexist. I'm like, no, that's your judgment. That's your prejudice. So it's not. It's just that historically we have enough data that the audience on WatchMojo will end up being about 20% men, 80% female, with a 10, not a 10, on MsMojo, maybe a 25, 30% LGBT.
Right.
And that's the history of media. You could go back to hundreds of years and, or 100 years of mass media. And so it's more about the similarities in topics. It's absolutely true that if you like Call of Duty, you're probably strongly correlated to also listening to Metallica. Yeah. But if you do that, you might be more likely to be a male. But if you're a female and you like those things, the correlation is the same. So I view MsMojo, I avoid that trap of saying, oh, MsMojo is a 25-year-old female. She lives, with a roommate. She's, she likes a glass of Chardonnay. Those are your stereotypes. I never said that. You know what I mean? I could watch some videos on MsMojo. My neighbor could. So it's more the basket. But I also don't want to insult people's intelligence. Obviously, MsMojo is a channel that serves what is traditionally a female-skewed demographic, right? And I think you have to be, I think to be successful these days in media is you need to be a student of both history and sociology and anthropology. Clearly, the history of media is that you do program according to demographics and geographies and all that. But if you're not aware of anthropology and frankly sociology, that the world has changed and, younger audiences have a very different view of gender roles and stereotypes and all that, then you have to be careful, right? But yeah, so I do think, it's obviously clearly female skew, but it's more about the psychodemographic of what you would listen to, what you would watch, sorry.
That's interesting. That's cool. Well, I something that came to mind before when you mentioned, Google is the 13th search engine and YouTube, and when WatchMojo joined YouTube, I'm guessing the idea of I don't want to say a free business model, but making money off of, let's say, YouTube ad revenue streams. How did you feel about that starting off? Was that a scary concept? Was that
okay? So let's go back. When Google came on the scene, Google's initial business model, which lasted all of 5 days, was we have this technology, we're going to get websites to pay us for it. And they had this VP that they brought on from Netscape, one of the first browsers, named Omid Kordestani. And he basically said, yeah, that's not the business model that's going to work. We should basically give away this technology and then sell ads next to it. And that business model became the greatest business model in the history of advertising and media, and the results speak for themselves. When I started my career, it was in the search engine industry. We were a much smaller competitor to Google, but when we started, we were bigger. So I studied that, and I kind of saw that, basically, online you have the 3 C's, content, commerce, community. But when it comes to the business models, we're still in this ad-supported game because it always goes back to consumer behavior. Consumers did not want to take out their credit card and pay for content. So when I left the search engine industry, I actually spent 5 years in online publishing. I was a columnist, I was a vice president of ad sales and doing partnerships and doing a lot of interviews. But I was basically literally on the ground, in the trenches, writing articles as a columnist, but then as wearing the VP of sales hat, selling the aggregate audience and the page views and the ad impressions to brands. So I grew up in that environment where it was always build a catalog, build an audience, build a real community, and then monetize the audience somehow at an aggregate level with advertising. When I started WatchMojo, there was a lot of things that were similar, but there was a lot of things that was different. The model of growing your audience with articles was you could give half of your article to, let's say, MSN, and then they would link to you, and then they would send you traffic for the second half of the article. With videos, you couldn't really upload half your video on YouTube, but you couldn't keep your videos on your website because the audience was on the YouTubes of the world. People were not going to these websites to watch videos. So I was actually quite comfortable to produce content for free and then monetize it somehow, some other way. Because for me, it was always clear that audiences were not going to pay for content. Eventually, with the Apple's launch of iTunes, we did see that. I said, well, yeah, clearly that, again, consumer behavior, as much as reluctantly they don't want to pay for music, if the convenience is so high and the cost is so low at $1 a track, that was pretty reasonable. I felt consumer behavior will change, and it would. But again, when there was entrepreneurs and investors saying, oh, WatchMojo's type of content, you should get clients to pay for it, I said, let's relax there. I'm very proud. I don't think people are going to pay for WatchMojo kind of content, which is premium. It's in the middle of the pyramid of content, but it's not super premium. It's not Avatar. It's not American Idol. It's not Mad Men. And rightfully so, Netflix, when it came around, the reason they went into premium content is because they could see that audiences would pay more likely to become subscribers if it wasn't just an aggregation play and there was premium content. So we've seen now, again, coming full circle. We saw ad-supported, then we saw subscription models with Netflix and others, but now linear, basically television, has seen dramatic market share loss. There's a lot of audiences shifting to streaming more and more. What has not really come over is that big $75 billion in ad spending in the US each year. That money will flow to the internet, and it won't go to SVOD, subscription video on demand, because those models don't generally take advertising. It will flow to advertising video on demand. So you're actually going to see a big boom coming in the 5 and 10 years where that TV ad budget is going to flow all to the internet.
I guess that's really interesting. So we spoke about that. This is in a different class, but how, yeah, government money basically shifted from, let's say, like the news to online. And in this sense, how would you say from when you founded, WatchMojo in 2006, I think it was, to MsMojo in 2016, how did you see this changing? Because I heard you mentioning, ad subscription models for YouTube. And would you say that your idea of your revenue stream therefore changed since there's so much more money in the ecosystem, let's say now, or how do you view it?
Yep. So great question. One of the most successful investors, his name is Michael Milken. And Michael Milken has a great quote. He goes, the best investor is a social scientist. And I think ultimately it all goes back to consumer behavior and whatnot. So when I started my career, let's say I worked in search briefly for a year, then I worked in online publishing. When I would go meet, let's say, a vice president at Hearst or Vogue or Esquire or Maxim,
right,
I want to be respectful. I don't want to say their head was in the sand, but effectively that was the visual. Like they were just very comfortable on their perch, thinking that it was good times, nothing would change. The first economic meltdown, in 2000, 2001, with the NASDAQ bubble bursting, the dot-com, crash, 9/11, that actually gave traditional media companies and advertisers a sense of security, but a false sense of security, that it was business as usual. So the companies that started to invest online actually pulled back. They laughed at the internet. They said, there's no need to be there. It's the good old days of print.
Right.
What ended up happening is that whole decade, you had a lot of companies, including the Googles and the Facebooks, starting to invest and grow a lot of power online, whereas the traditional guys scaled back. When 2007 hit, the economic meltdown, that basically destroyed print. And print was not positioned for digital. What I realized, though, at a micro level in the trenches was, hey, when I now go and talk to these executives, they're no longer head in the sand. They've lost their jobs. They've been replaced by younger executives. And this isn't ageism, but it's more behavior. The younger demo has kind of a very different relationship with the internet.
Yeah.
Now, if you fast forward another 10 years, so I started WatchMojo, and that was still a bit like then the conversations I used to have with print, I was now having with TV execs, their head was, proverbially speaking, in the sand. If you fast forward, what's happened now is it's just unrecognizable. You're dealing with executives who have been brought up on the internet, who grew up on YouTube. They not only know the lingo and the game and the landscape, but they don't even watch TV. They don't have like their parents, let's say, or their older siblings or their young uncles and aunts' behaviors. They are now running these companies, and they are basically 100% geared towards digital. So if you are the government, Justin Trudeau, Donald Trump, the heads of states are still a bit older, like they grew up in a different way, but you address government ad spending. If you are managing, the government's billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars in ad spending, well, obviously you're going to basically be not spending that on the Montreal Gazette or Toronto Star's website. You're going to be spending that where? On Google, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter. So it's a sign of the times, and I do think you're going to see an acceleration because of COVID. COVID will do to TV advertising what the 2008 apocalypse did to print advertising.
It is also interesting to see, I guess, along that line, how politics and campaigns also definitely play into ads. Like I know the Obama campaign worked a lot with like data online from people, and Trump in a totally different way. But that is an interesting thing to note for sure.
Yeah, I mean, President Obama's campaign was, the digital component was designed to some extent by, I believe, Chris Hughes, who was a Facebook co-founder, and he went over and he kind of led it, and it was one of the most successful examples of using technology. Donald Trump, set aside politics, set aside all that, gets a lot of credit for somebody on his team for recognizing that there were these tools and these kind of data pattern and profiling and projecting that would allow them to amplify their reach. Now, in life, again, it's a lot of humanities before business.
Yeah.
It's psychology, right? It's sociology. In life, you're always struggling. You're walking the fine line between good and evil. You're always, as a business person, as an entrepreneur, struggling to not give in to greed excessively. Like a little bit of greed, that sentiment is good because you want to have money to pay your employees, pay your suppliers on time, and you're always concerned about fear, right? So there's always that risk and return. There's always this dichotomy. So I would say, not a political statement, Obama's team recognized like the power that the internet could have, generate a positive emotion of change, and yes, we can. Donald Trump, to his credit, unfortunately, like in an evil genius way, I think he was shown some raw data, and he was like, what? So everybody is trying to court the African American vote, the Latino vote, the soccer mom vote. He goes, those will make, I'm not sure if he got this, but somebody on his team said, so all these groups are going to become really big, and maybe in 2020 and 2024 and definitely 2032, they're going to swing things to more liberal, more to the left. But right now, all we got to do is get a fraction of the white voter, the male kind of the world is against me, like build up the paranoia. Let's blame the Muslims and the Jews and the blacks and the women and the lesbians and the gays. Let's get those guys to vote, and horrible output, let's say, but to his credit, in a simple, black and white way, they recognize the power that maybe Hillary's team didn't, but they obviously used it more for evil, so to speak, meaning like they kind of let Russia meddle when they got, it's a whole, we're going to look back at what happened in 2016 and frankly 2016, 2020 US history as like, research papers will be written. A lot will be written about this period, but it was basically harnessing these tools for, more nefarious outcomes. And that's where now we find ourselves, where the governments and policymakers are saying, okay, maybe these platforms are not traditional monopolies. And I know we're talking about something else now, but they are these like weapons of mass destruction. And, is it laissez-faire capitalism? What does that lead? Or is it super highly regulated, but then do politicians know what they're talking about? So it's fascinating. It's like we have the front row seats, and, I have a vague idea of what's going to happen, but who knows?
You mean for the election?
For the election, for everything, for just how much government will get involved in technology companies.
Yeah, I feel like push pulling and fake news has definitely morphed certain things in this sense. And I suppose the final question for you is how WatchMojo and MsMojo seem, correct me if I'm wrong, but to have remained independent media platforms and did not accept demand media models that investors were interested in. So I was wondering if you could describe the key activities that allowed MsMojo and WatchMojo to be sustainable over the years, given that now competition is so high and the barriers to entry are low on YouTube.
Okay, great question. So, I mean, look, the reality is that the macro trends and backdrop does evolve, right? There was a time that like the investors like those content farm models that demand media and others were kind of pushing, and we resisted. We were like, well, it's more about balance, right? You don't want to be producing one video and hoping it's the Mona Lisa.
Right.
You want to maybe build the Louvre where you have a collection of great works, videos, and hoping that there's like a portfolio diversified approach. But I think investors have moved on. They realize that you can't just scale for scale's sake. It's not just quantity only. Maybe I'm still a bit more balanced, like quality, quantity, frequency, consistency. Like it needs to, resonate. But ultimately, look, you use the word sustainable. Things that are sustainable don't scale overnight. And things that historically online have scaled overnight are not sustainable. It's not that complicated. So investors, I think, have become more savvy, and they kind of understand that if you're going to back content companies, it can't be an extreme approach. You can't just be like, let's give everything up to the robots and automate content production. That's going to turn very, robotic, and that won't work. But you also can't take a very like traditional view where you controlled not just production, but you controlled distribution. So you could say, hey, at 8 p.m. on Thursday, I'm going to put this show and you're going to watch it. Or I'm going to take this article and put it smack down in the middle of the front page of the New York Times, and you have no choice but to read it. The reality is that by virtue of the internet democratizing production and distribution, disintermediating between the middleman, where I could produce content and you as a consumer will get it directly, that is something that not everybody's comfortable with. And ironically, not even those who were disrupting the incumbents, right? So I look at it as, hey, somebody is in the basement looking at knocking us and disrupting us, and that's the normal way. That's how it should be. So I think the landscape has changed, the mood has changed. Investors are probably looking at things a bit more like the way we did, and I think the reason why MsMojo and WatchMojo have continued to be resilient is just because we've actually been patient. We're very aggressive, but we understand that these things take time.
That it reminds me in a way, I mean, different example, but of Deadspin at the time. I think when I think they were acquired. I forget the name of the company, but it's almost as if the investors or people who acquired it wanted it to be something it wasn't.
Absolutely, it's like they didn't know what they bought, and it had a very specific culture of like covering beyond sports. And then the investors were like, just stick to sports. And what happens if you tell an independent thinker that's like a journalist or a writer, don't do something? Well, he or she's going to do it. They're going to wake up first thing in the morning and do it. So I do think that realistically, it just goes back to, the same way that a publisher needs to understand their audience. I think as an investor, you need to understand who your client, the entrepreneur is, and who your audience ultimately is. So, if you understand and you know what you're getting yourself into, you can be successful.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.